Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Delta X podcast with Ellen Shu. These are conversations with changemakers, innovators, and self-starters who have made their mark on the world at a young age, breaking down the journeys of those who are changing the status quo and building the future today. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Welcome back to Delta X Podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Shu, and today's podcast episode is going to be a special coverage specifically on Black Hat USA 2021 with one of our special speakers who presented Deepfake Social Engineering, creating a framework for synthetic media social engineering at Black Hat. And so today with me, I have Dr. Matthew Canham. He is the CEO of Beyond Layer 7 and also a research professor of cybersecurity at the University of Central Florida. Previously, he was also a former cyber crimes investigator for the US government and holds a PhD in cognitive psychology with special expertise in human-centric cybersecurity, data analytics, and behavioral engineering. And so for listeners who may not have heard of Black Hat before, Black Hat is one of the most recognized information security event series internationally. And what it does is it provides the security community with the latest cutting-edge research, developments, and trends from the best minds in the industry. And so I'm really excited to have one of these speakers and professionals here with me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Could you first start off by explaining what deepfake technology is and its significance today?
Deepfake technology, in a nutshell, uses artificial intelligence to repurpose or re-engineer existing audio or video files to in effect, create a what I call a syn puppet, a synthetic puppet, to say whatever it is that the puppet master wants that digital syn puppet to do or say. A video of former President Obama that is being controlled by the comedian Jordan Peele. And so the computer maps on spots, pre-selected areas on the face to then map President Obama's face to Jordan Peele's, and then President Obama's face moves with Jordan Peele's expressions, what he's saying, and then the audio tracks as well. Now, that being said, I do want to briefly mention that synthetic media is a broader term that encompasses deepfake technology. So deepfake gets all of the sort of press, but in terms of security concerns, we see other types of synthetic media that are also concerning. And I'll give you a quick example, chatbots. So we see a lot of chatbots in sort of mass phishing campaigns and gift card scams and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think I've also seen some of these deepfakes around on the internet too, like you mentioned the Obama one, and also there's this meme Tom Cruise one that was floating around at some point as well. So I think when most people think deepfakes, they think of these fun little videos or stuff like that. But since talking about Black Hat here, why are deepfakes so dangerous, and what are some things we have to watch out for when using them?
Well, I think one of the reasons that deepfakes are so dangerous is that we're so used to just sort of believing what we see and hear, because up until this point of time, really that was a pretty valid assumption. But we're very quickly moving to a point where we can no longer do that. My research focus at University of Central Florida is in remote online social engineering. So this is any sort of technologically mediated social engineering. Now, whenever the social engineer is interacting with the potential victim through some sort of technology, there's always that potential to manipulate what that potential victim is seeing, hearing, so on and so forth. So synthetic media and deepfake technology is just sort of it just sort of adds to that spectrum. It's just sort of stretching that upper end of what's possible. Now, to get back to your question about what makes this technology so dangerous is, again, we're very used to believing what we see and hear, but also from a cognitive perspective, what makes these so dangerous is that When we understand what we see in the world, there's kind of two directions that we can understand that from. And
Hmm.
what we feel like we experience is that we experience information in the environment, and then we draw a conclusion from that. But sometimes it's actually backwards, that we actually come in with our conclusion, and then we fit what we're seeing to that preconception.
Hmm.
And there's a fantastic demonstration of this. I can send it to you later if you'd like, where
Yeah.
people are asked to count the number of passes between players in a basketball game. And in the middle of this video, a person in a gorilla suit comes walking through and then pounds their chest and then continues walking. Anywhere from around 40 to 60% of people miss that gorilla. They don't see him because
Wow.
their preconception or their focus is towards a certain thing that they're directing their attention to. So when we get to something like online social engineering, when that expectation is set, we people have a tendency to sort of fill in those blanks or to overlook inconsistencies. And so, again, deep fakes just sort of are make it that much more likely for someone to believe what they're seeing or hearing.
Mhm.
Um, so I can continue going on if you would like, but if not, I'll stop.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you have this like cognitive lens to it as well, and psychological lens. I think that's super interesting. But yeah, continue. Would love to hear more. This is really fascinating.
Well, and so to take a step back, let's take a phishing attack. Now, phishing
Hmm.
uses email to socially engineer someone into taking an action, right? So it's a pretty simple attack in terms of the complexity of how attacks go. Um, Now, what research has shown, actually NIST has done this research, is that when the email fits with someone's expectations, they will overlook something like spelling errors or grammar errors or some other inconsistency. So again, they're filling in those blanks.
Hmm.
But when it's not consistent with something that they are expecting, let's say somebody from HR gets an account or excuse me, a past due notice as a PDF, they're much more likely to scrutinize that and be a little bit suspicious. Whereas if that same person in human resources gets a PDF of, say, like a resume or a job application, they're more likely to maybe click on that because it fits within what they're expected to receive. So bringing this back to deep fakes, there's one very well documented case of voice phishing, so
Hmm.
phishing with a V, using audio deep fake technology. And this was a firm in the UK in 2019. And the attackers were impersonating the CEO's voice. And it was so convincing that they were able to vish that same person, that same victim at that company 3 times. And it wasn't until the fourth time that the victim actually started to become suspicious and reported it to security.
Wow.
So when you combine the expectation of what the person thinks that they're seeing or expects to be seeing or hearing, along with that thing that looks or sounds like the person that they would be expecting to receive this from, it makes for a very, very dangerous combination.
I see. So we have this like bias towards like certain videos that makes it even easier for us to believe in these deepfakes. Right? Yeah. And
Exactly.
I,
Yeah.
I I know this technology. Is this technology pretty recent or new, or is this something that's also has been developed throughout a longer period of time?
Well, it's been around for a while. I mean,
Mm.
Hollywood's been using it for quite some time. In fact,
Oh,
the first
really?
time that I actually encountered it in person was, I would say probably around 2010 at
Mhm.
the Institute of Creative Technologies, which is part of University of Southern California. And they were producing some of these computer generated animations for some of the film industry. But what has changed is that the technology has become much more accessible. So
Mhm.
there are free open source, FOSS type of platforms that are out there that are available, and and they're becoming so usable that someone even with not a lot of technological sophistication can use these. And so I'll give you one example is that there's a woman in Pennsylvania right now who stands accused of creating deep fakes of members of a cheerleading school that were in this school with her daughter. I'm not sure exactly what happened, if there was some bullying or something, but the lady is accused of making deep fakes in an effort to get them kicked off of the cheering program. And
Wow.
so, yeah, engaged in activities that would have gotten them kicked off.
Mhm.
But the point to that is that everything that I've looked at in her background suggests that she's not, highly technical. So with the proliferation of this technology, actually the FBI in March issued a private industry notification that they expect over the next 12 to 18 months an uptick in these types of attacks.
Wow, I see. So it's become more accessible, and I assume the initial intent was for it to like be used as media entertainment.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So I think it's easy to focus on the potential malicious uses of this,
Mhm.
but what would be some of the legitimate uses of it? One would be that you could star in your favorite movie. So if you like Star Wars,
Uh-huh.
then we could use deep fake technology to put you in as the lead character of that Star Wars movie. And so, I mean, there's really some interesting use cases there of the technology, but like everything, there's a two sides to it, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. With like this powerful technology, there's so many. Like that'd be really cool. I think in the future we have like interactive movies. We get to really be more engaged with our media and entertainment. But then again, there's also a lot of risk of this, and the bias, and also how advanced as the technology advances, how it's becoming more difficult to detect deepfakes.
Yes.
And yeah, so one thing I was curious about as well is how hard is it to detect deepfake today? And like, what are some things that kind of can be as signs that, what we're looking at might not be legitimate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the short answer is that there are some countermeasures out there
Mhm.
that are technology based that are very good, and they're getting good. They're getting better all the time. However, the challenge is that there's always sort of this arms race, right? So you have the people defending against it, make some advances, and then the people who are, trying to perpetrate this kind of get a little further. And
Mhm.
there's right now we're sort of at a dynamic point where no one side is really going to have the advantage. And for that reason, I advocate more on a human-centric solutions. And the other reason that I advocate for that is that sometimes these technologies, these technical countermeasures, they're not readily accessible. So if you get a phone call on your
Mhm.
personal phone, you may not even think to engage some sort of a technical countermeasure, or you may not have it on your personal phone, so on and so forth. So, I mean, the short answer is in terms of what people can do to detect it, if, if it's somebody that is familiar to you, you can create shared secrets.
Mhm.
So, just a very quick way to authenticate that the person on the other side is, in fact, who you're talking to. And it's a very simple solution, and it's very effective. For, organizations, for the enterprise, this is an area where multi-factor authentication, MFA, can be very effective. Um, in terms of other types of detection techniques, something that one of my grad students and I are starting to look at right now is whether or not there are detectable neurosignatures of detection of deep fakes. So if we have a video that has not been altered, and then we have another video where it has been altered, but the same person in each video, is somebody aware of that without actually being consciously aware of that? So without getting into too much detail, there are neurosignatures that are detectable through EEG, which is kind of like that head net that people wear to detect, electronic signals. Are there signatures that indicate that the person is aware that they're looking at a deep fake, even if they're not consciously aware? So that's something that we're starting to look at now. And if we do find that, then there might be ways to train people to be more acute to some of the cues. And so there's an area of the brain that's called the fusiform gyrus. And as far as we know, this area of the brain, its sole function is just face perception. So distinguishing one face from another, reading facial expressions, interpreting emotions, these kinds of things. Well, and because of that, a lot of the deep fake technology has very, very subtle but noticeable distortions, sometimes around the face or sometimes in facial expressions. And it's really hard to sort of edit that out or overcome that. And I don't know if you've ever come across this term, but there's a term called the uncanny valley.
Oh, I don't think I've heard of it before.
So this character was played by an actor who's been deceased for like 20 or 30 years. And so they completely computer generated the character in the movie.
Wow.
And a lot of people complained that it looked weird and it looked fake, and it actually drew a lot of ire from the fans. And part of that is that humans are so adept at perceiving very subtle facial expressions and mannerisms and so on and so forth, that if something doesn't quite fit with what our expectations are, it can actually really stand out at us, and it can look very unsettling. And so that it's that unsettling feeling that produces what is known as this uncanny valley, which is the inability to jump across the believability of the character.
Oh, I see. So is your research, if you don't mind me asking, for the cognitive side, like you mentioned with your graduate student, is that about trying to leverage that uncanny effect and seeing if, even if you're not consciously aware that this might be a deep fake, that we know that there's something in the back of our mind going like, this isn't real, or there's something off with this?
That's precisely what we're doing. And I mean, to be clear, we don't really know if that exists. We're looking right now. If we can show that it does, then that might suggest some ways that we might be able to, institute better, human-centric countermeasures. But yeah, it's an open question at this point.
Wow, I see. Yeah, definitely be huge if, there is some part of the brain that is able to catch these deep fakes, even more so than, having a technological solution towards, sorting out the deep fakes from the non-deep fakes. But yeah, I really would love to get into more of this cognitive psychology later. But for one final question about the Deepfake Social Engineering, since your presentation must have been really amazing. I know that Black Hat's already passed, but I'm sure the presentation would have been magnificent. So for all the listeners who were not able to be present, could you briefly summarize,
Sure.
maybe like a very high level overview of what your talk was all about?
Yeah, well, what it was about was that I developed a framework for describing synthetic media attacks. And so again, this is more, it's broader than just deep fakes. And so deep fakes fit within the framework in the sense that the framework has 5 dimensions. And the first of those is the medium. So this would be like video, audio, a combination of audio, video, or text, right? And so then the next dimension is control. And control is whether or not there's a human behind it, whether or not it's software behind it, or a combination of both. And I'll give you an example very quickly of that. Something that I've seen a lot of is sort of like these chatbots that control like gift card scams. And so somebody will receive a text message, like an SMS text message, and it'll ask them something very simple like, are you busy? Can you help me with something? And you'll see an exchange between the bot and the person, maybe a back and forth of 3 or 4 times. And then all of a sudden it'll switch very quickly. And you can tell that it's a human because they start getting into sort of nuances and very controlling or directing sort of behavior that a bot just wouldn't really be capable of. And so in that case I just gave you, the medium would be text, the control would be hybrid. The next dimension is familiarity. And the familiarity refers to is the synthetic puppet that you're being presented with. Is that somebody who's completely unfamiliar, someone who is familiar to you, say like a coworker or a boss, or is it like a close relation, somebody that you know very well? And I will tell you that one thing that we're beginning to see more of in terms of a cyber-enabled crime is what is known as virtual kidnappings. And in this case, the virtual kidnappers will claim to have a close relation, that they've kidnapped them and that they're holding them for ransom. In order to get them released, the victim has to pay some money. Well, you can imagine how deepfake technology will be used for that in the future. And in terms of the unfamiliar aspect, something that is very common is fake social media profiles, also known as sock puppets. And you can go to the website thispersondoesnotexist.com, and you can see AI generated people, and all of the people that you will see in the pictures do not exist. They were completely generated by an AI. And so a way that someone could very quickly and easily generate someone who is unfamiliar but looks convincing and put that into a social media platform or profile. The next dimension is interactivity. So this is something that's pre-recorded versus something that's, interactive, something that's, like real-time interactive. The example I gave with the woman that made the deepfakes of the cheerleaders, that would be an example of pre-recorded. If I'm not actually talking to Ellen right now, but I'm talking to somebody else that looks like Ellen using deepfake technology, then that would be a real-time interaction. Yeah, I have no idea. I'm going completely on faith here. And then the last dimension is the target of the attack. Now, we typically think of humans as being the target, but we can think of biometrics also as being a target, right? And so when we start thinking in those terms, you have things like facial recognition, voice recognition, but also you could think of synthetic media as being 3D printed material for fingerprint authentication, right? And so in that case, the intended target is actually automation. It's not a human. And then the other sort of subdimension of that is whether or not it's an individual or whether it's a broader audience. And so one of the concerns with deep fakes is like disinformation, misinformation attacks, maybe making a deep fake of a well-known newscaster saying, reporting news that isn't actually accurate. That would be an example of an attack that was targeting a very broad audience, as opposed to, like a Zoom chat where it'd be like a one-on-one.
I see. And even looking towards for maybe the next 20 or next 50 years, how do you think this technology will continue to progress? Will there be like even more realistic deepfakes? At some point, will it even be hard for like anyone to be able to tell the difference?
It's a good question. My guess is that it's going to just keep
Mhm.
improving, just like everything else that we've seen. And we haven't even really talked about like immersive virtual reality and some of these sorts of things, but that's kind of where I expect it to go, is that we're going to see more. I mean, once you start talking about virtual worlds, I mean, then everything is, rendered, right? So yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I certainly think that the technology will get better. I think the technology to detect deepfakes will also get better.
Mhm.
Um, I think it gets into a broader question though, right? Because we're talking about how do you authenticate the person on the other side of the communication.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know. That's going to be a very challenging and interesting thing to overcome, because you also have to weigh privacy on that, right? So are there ways that we can authenticate who we're talking to on the other end without
Mhm.
necessarily compromising privacy? And yeah, I don't have a quick and easy answer for you, but I think it's going to be one of the challenges moving forward.
For sure. And yeah, even just thinking about these things, it makes you wonder, what does it really like mean for someone to be human, or what are some ways we can even perform these Turing tests ourselves and continually make them more decisive and discriminative between deepfakes and, what an actual human acts like and looks like. But I think this also goes a little bit into, consciousness and whether these these machines can even be sentient. And so I think this would be a great transition into your work with cognitive psychology as well. And
Sure.
so just a starter question, what is exactly cognitive psychology?
Well, in the broadest sense, it is the study of how the brain and the mind function. And this is a gross oversimplification, but
Uh-huh.
it'll kind of work. The brain is like the hardware, right? And the mind is like the software that runs on the hardware. And so you have cognitive neuroscience, which focuses more on how the hardware operates, but then you'll
Uh-huh.
have cognitive psychology that focuses more on how the software operates. And in fact, some of the early neural networks were designed by cognitive psychologists in an effort to model how the human mind operates. They were trying to understand how the human mind operates, and they developed these neural networks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like the comparison you made, like the simple analogy of the brain being like the hardware, and then like the psychology or like the mind being like the software. And so I know you mentioned that there are a lot of connections with cognitive psychology and cybersecurity. Personally, for you, how did you get into both of these? I know you've been very heavily involved in both sides and of both cybersecurity and its cognitive psychology.
Well, I started out with cognitive psychology. Like
Mhm.
as I mentioned, I got my PhD in cognitive psychology, and after that, I sort of on a whim applied for a job to do investigations, and was very surprised that I was hired into that position.
Uh-huh.
And so everything I learned in the training up to doing investigations, and then also actually doing investigations. So everything I learned was through the federal government. And then I left and I went back into academia about 4 years ago. And when I did that, I sort of synthesized the two, because I already had a background in research and in this sort of human side,
Mhm.
and then also the field investigations. Um, but what really inspired me was that when I went into the field, I expected to see, these very sophisticated sort of hacks. I expected to see, I don't know, somebody mapping a network and finding, vulnerabilities, and then, launching these exploits and getting through the firewall and doing all this stuff that,
Mhm.
we had learned about. But the reality is, and this is still true, that something like 94% of all attacks or all breaches start with a phishing email. And that's true, I think, as recently as last year, according to the Verizon data breach incident report. And
Wow.
so, regardless of how sophisticated the malware might be, it's getting through, it's getting injected or introduced through very simple vectors, and it's almost always a human. And so this really got me thinking, and it made me realize very early on that this is a human problem in a technology sort of environment, not a technology problem. And so that's been a focus of mine for research, well, throughout my entire last 4 years, is really looking at how can we apply principles of cognitive psychology to make people more safe in cyberspace. And it's a problem that we're still working on. However, one of the things I'm using as inspiration is the aviation industry. So a lot of cognitive psychology made breakthroughs actually around the time of World War II, and more recently in designing airplane cockpits. And so there's a whole sub discipline known as human factors psychology, and
Mhm.
in particular aviation human factors psychology. And I'll mention one particular aspect of this that I've been collaborating with actually my business partner, Dr. Clay Posey, on. And this is in something called crew resource management. And so there were like 2 or 3 very prominent aviation disasters that happened kind of in the early 1980s. And what happened in almost every case was that the pilot would get fixated on something, and the pilot being, I should say, the captain, because these were
Mhm.
always a crew of at least like 3 or more aviators. And because of the social hierarchy, no one wanted to say anything that would contradict what the decisions that the captain was making.
Mhm.
And so after investigating these accidents, the FAA and other regulatory agencies said, look, we need to institute something, a better culture that will allow the subordinates to question, the captain or the leader. And doing that, well, the implementation of that was this crew resource management, which is kind of like if you see something, say something, but for the aviation world.
Mhm.
And that one little change in culture has saved countless lives in aviation. And I think, the particular fix or the particular implementation of that in security is going to be different. But I believe that there are cultural changes that we can make that will make people more secure as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I find it really interesting how you mentioned that most of the times we believe like the technology is so sophisticated and that's why we're getting hacked without realizing that maybe us humans aren't as good as detecting these phishing emails and these deep fakes as well as we might have thought. Um, but yeah, I think I'm also curious to hear about. I know you mentioned there's a lot of ways that cognitive psychology can make us more safe. Is there anything that listeners or people who are frequently using online, which I assume is all of us, like using these technologies, is there anything that we could do that kind of leverages any principles of cognitive psychology to keep us more safe?
One of the most commonly leveraged aspects of our psychology or our cognition is what I would refer to as a limitation attack. I'll just call it that.
Uh-huh.
And what a limitation attack would be something that seeks to circumvent our limitations on how we process information. Okay. So I mentioned the example with the person in the ape suit, ape costume earlier, right?
Uh-huh.
And so that's a fantastic example of how when we're fixated on one particular thing, on one particular task, we do that at the detriment of other things that are going on around it, right? Because we can only focus on so many things at one time. And so threat actors use this to their advantage, right? So in phishing emails, it's very common that the emails try to be emotionally provocative. Okay, so like your account has been shut down, and in order to reinstate it, click here so that you can fix this problem that we purport that you have, or distracting in some way. Maybe through the story of what's called the pretext of the email. And so, maybe, by getting someone fixated on something like a deadline or something, they can keep the potential victim focused on that. And this isn't just in cyberspace, actually. There's sort of an older movie that anyone who's interested in security should absolutely watch. And this movie is called Sneakers. It's like somewhere in the 1992, 1993 era, right? And there's a perfect example of a in-person limitation attack where this group, they're pen testers, and they're pen testers in an era before that was a commonly known term. And so one of the people in the team goes up, and they've got it's a delivery that's supposed to occur, and but they're not on the list. So they get into this argument with the guard, and they're distracting the guard, and they're getting them really wrapped up in this argument. And then at the same time, there's somebody who comes walking up, and they have like their badge, and their badge isn't working, and they say to them, would you just open the damn door? And the guard just pushes the button without really looking, and the other pen tester just goes right through the door. And so this is an example of where the guard, the limit on their cognition, because they're getting so fixated that the other social engineer is able to get right around that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest gaps that we have in terms of our own personal security. It's difficult to get around that. The only way that you can is to be very systematic and to slow down. Every time that you feel like you're being rushed or that you feel like you're being distracted, you got to stop and you got to just refocus. And again, this is an area where aviation can be really helpful, right? Because if you look at aviation and how they handle things like emergencies, there are checklists. There are checklists for preparation. If the landing gear won't go down, well, then there's a checklist that they follow. And something similar can help, to keep us, safe online.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's very interesting how you mentioned that there's a lot of like cognitive blind spots too, and how, we can be distracted and fixated in one thing while we're not being like putting our full attention into really trying to figure out the full story behind another. And so, I think this is especially important for phishing emails. And I've seen like many incidents of also like phishing emails affecting like my friends or family. And I think next time definitely being aware that, maybe there's some emotional aspects, psychological aspects that we have to just be trying to think as clearly as possible with. I think we're approaching the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
For all the listeners, hope you enjoyed this podcast and special episode covering a very distinguished Black Hat guest and speaker. And see the show notes, I'll link below some resources, as well as some material anything that Matthew would like to include as well. I know there are a few videos and articles mentioned I can for sure link down, as well as the newsletter you can subscribe to get these podcast episodes in your inbox every 2 weeks. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Delta X Podcast with Ellen Shu. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.